for having me here. I met Carol Sue years ago in, I think when I came to speak at your Beverly Hills group, yeah? So I asked if I could talk about something different that I don't talk much about in my book, because of course, there are plenty of men who could write very important women and things they do. There are a lot of things I didn't put in the book and things that I've been researching in the past few years about the underlying things that Shakespeare says about women in the plays. Because as Juliet Duesenberg said, in 1975, in the beginning of the new feminism, where in every other field, understanding of Shakespeare's art grows, reactions to his women continually recycle because critics are still immersed in preconceptions which Shakespeare discarded about the nature of women. And this is still true today. I'm constantly bumping up against old canards that people say, oh, this and that about Shakespeare and women. So I'm hoping to dispel some of those today. Much has been written about there are more male characters than there are female characters. Oh, the female characters have fewer lines than the male characters. And I have an issue with that because Shakespeare creates brilliantly these women, and many of them don't need that number of lines to be important. Cordelia doesn't have very many lines. Miranda doesn't have very many lines. Titania doesn't have very many lines. Does that mean they are lesser characters? No, it means Shakespeare has drawn them so big with the fewer lines. Lady Macbeth doesn't have nearly as many lines as Mr. Macbeth. Mistress Quickly, she doesn't have that many lines, but how can we forget her? She's in 4 plays. So I want to look at just a couple of statistics about that. In the 1580s, plays written in the 1580s, not a single female lead in any play in the 1580s. Only 1 play with a female in a secondary role and 1 in a tertiary role. In the 1590s, 24 plays have a woman among the top 3 roles. And of those 24, 13 of them are Shakespeare's. So something new is happening. In Shakespeare's canon, 2/3 of Shakespeare's play have a female in the top 3 roles. Females that we hugely remember and respond to. So again, I'm not saying a man couldn't have written these women that we're going to look at. But if it was a woman, we would expect to see something different. And this presentation is really, I mean, we can't know Shakespeare's intentions, but this presentation is just going to shine a light on the kinds of women that Shakespeare writes about, and not just the women themselves, but the underlying things that Shakespeare says in the text that seem to have a closer connection to women than any other writer of the time. We're going to look at the froward women. I love that line in Train Me to the Shrew. That wench is stark mad when they first meet Katharina, or wonderful froward. She's wonderful in her frowardness. Women who dress as men, we all know there are women who dress as men, and we think it's kind of cute because, oh, isn't that great? They have to dress as a man, and they go out. But it was considered, and these are from writings of the time, monstrous and unnatural for a woman to dress as a man. It displays insubordination. It's a threat to respectable society. It jeopardizes the balance of male-female community, and it gives you an attitude. You do get an attitude. It's like wearing snakeskin boots. You just get an attitude about it. So it becomes a little subversive, and it can be dangerous. Portia dresses as a man and leads a very important court case. Nerissa acts as her law clerk, and Jessica runs away from her father, dressed as a boy. Rosalind is forced to leave on pain of death. She goes to the forest, she buys property, she dispenses advice, she arranges people's marriage, which is usually a man's job. Viola survives a shipwreck, and what's the first thing she says? Oh man, I gotta get a job. She dresses as a young man. Julia, Two Gentlemen of Verona, dresses as a young man, runs away from Verona to Milan to find her lover. Imogen, oh my God, we just had a close reading session this morning on Imogen in Cymbeline, dresses as a young man, runs away to Wales, later joins the Roman army. She is such an amazing person. Joan of Arc dresses as a warrior. leads political maneuvers and battles in Shakespeare, which she didn't historically. We have women who defy their fathers, and this is not a simple thing. This has serious implications culturally, socially, in the family. Fathers don't like this, but how many women do it? Anne Page does. Anne Page in Mary Wise of Windsor, her father hires somebody to kidnap her and run away and marry her. Her mother does the same thing, and Anne runs off with somebody of her own. Bianca in The Taming of the Shrew defies her father. Her father literally sells her to the highest bidder. In the text, literally sells her to the highest bidder. And she runs off with somebody she wants. Now, they don't get in too much trouble. Jessica's father, when she ran off, he wants her dead at his feet. Desdemona's father disowns her. Juliet's father wants to take her through town on a hurdle and cast her out to beg and starve. Hermia's father, Hermia, Midsummer Night's Dream, he wants to literally murder her. It's my prerogative. I can kill her if I want. Imogen and Cymbeline, her father locks her up. Lavinia, she runs off with the man she wants, and her father's so distraught, he actually murders one of his own sons, one of his own remaining sons. Sylvia is locked up in a tower. Perdita defies her own supposed father, who just says, I'm going to lay down and die. And her lover's father wants her to put her to horrible death for marrying the man she wants. Shakespeare shows us it's not easy, but women do it anyway. These are some of the women who lead battles, lead wars in the plays. Hero, Desdemona, Hermione, Mrs. Ford, Imogen, every one of them has insanely, and some of them literally insanely jealous husbands who try to murder them, embarrass them, etc. Virtuous women unjustly accused. We have women who travel, often alone. Rosalind tells us it's not easy to travel. Travel and travail were the same word at the time. Rosalind says when she decides she needs to dress up as a man to go, alas, what danger will it be to us, maids as we are? Maids specifically means virgins. Virgins as we are, to travel forth so far. Beauty provoketh thieves, and beauty in this case means young women. Young women provoketh thieves sooner than gold. Shakespeare is very aware of the danger of women traveling alone, or women traveling in general, and they go do it anyway. And Amelia's pregnant, the princess, Hermia and Helena, Portia, Nerissa, Cleopatra, Desdemona, Perdita, Imogen, Viola, Rosalind, and Celia. All three of those women, and all's well, Sylvia, they travel anyway. Shakespeare creates women who defy all these things they're not supposed to do or that are dangerous to do, and throws them out there anyway. Women who make fools of men. Queen Margaret, Rosalind, Portia, Nerissa, Paulina and Hermione, Isabella and Mariana, Diana and Helena, Princess of France and her three ladies, all four women, Merry Wives of Windsor, Maria. They make fools of men. This is what, 9 plays? 9 plays of the canon where the women make fools out of the men. And it's not always funny. Not necessarily funny when they do that. So moving to another segment, close female relationships. In 1929, Virginia Woolf, with her vast literary background, I tried to remember any case in the course of my reading where 2 women are represented as friends. I think this is quite an important thing in Shakespeare's plays. We have Hermia and Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And half of these, more than half of these, well, as you know, Shakespeare took a lot of plots from elsewhere. But more than half of these, Shakespeare added a female to the original plot. So we have intimate scenes of women. Hermia and Helena, Rosalind and Celia, Maria and Olivia, the 3 women in Coriolanus, Goneril and Regan, they're sisters, but we get intimate scenes of the 2 of them. Julia and Sylvia become great friends, the princess and her 3 women, Juliet and her nurse. Queen Margaret, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Anne, and the Duchess of York and Richard III. The longest scene in Richard III is Queen Margaret, Queen Elizabeth, and the Duchess on stage together for 140 lines, talking about their sons and husbands who have been murdered by each other's sons and husbands. It's the longest scene in the whole play, 3 women alone on stage. Adrian and Luciana, sisters, they talk a lot about what do women owe men in their marriages. Desdemona and Amelia, Beatrice and Hero, Paulina and Hermione. Oh my gosh, what a relationship they have. They keep a secret for what, 13 years, 16 years, 16 years. Cleopatra has her women with her, Portia and Nerissa, Mistress Ford and Mistress Page. You won't find this many female relationships, women sharing intimate moments together in the entire body of work from that time period in one writer's work. Another point. So most of the plots are taken from somewhere else. Shakespeare invented 4 of them, which all have pieces from somewhere else, but the original stories. So I was curious, when the writer is left to his or her own devices, what does that writer write about? We have 4 plays, all of them depend on women for the story. Love's Labor's Lost, 4 women. 4 women show up in that play who change the process. Midsummer Dream, all about Hermia and Helena. The Tempest, Miranda. What would the play be without Miranda? And The Merry Wives of Windsor. All 4 of those women make utter fools of almost every single man in the entire play. So what does that say about this author? I'm going to write a story and then writes these kinds of stories. I find that kind of hilarious. I do mention the feminine imagery in my book, but here's just a few. These are from Carolyn Spurgeon's brilliant book from 1935, I think it is. And she is, never occurs to her, the writer's anybody but William Shakespeare of Stratford. And she read through the plays 3 times and collected images, and she made charts of these images. And she says things like Shakespeare's interest in, and by the way, I'm reading these aloud because some people aren't looking at their screens. Shakespeare's interest in and observation of children and child nature from babyhood are remarkable, because she also looked at images in other people's plays. She finds these remarkable compared to other writers. Shakespeare has an unusually large number of images drawn from the daily work and occupations of women in a kitchen and living room. His interest in and acute observation of cooking operations are very marked all through his work, and she gives examples from the plays of everything she's saying. We say how extraordinarily close is his knowledge of different kinds of cooking. Shakespeare also noticed the women sewing and mending, which he saw going on around him, and there's clear evidence of his observation of and interest in needlework. Such an interesting man. There are not hundreds, but there are lots of those. I'm just giving you a hint. Feminine imagery, this is something I'm just starting to collect, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it yet, but I'm just finding it interesting. This is Trellis, who is a big warrior in the Trojan War. Not so much a warrior in Trellis and Cressida, but he has this thing he says. He's talking about a play so philosophical and rich. He's talking about his soul and Cressida, his love. And yet the spacious breadth of this division between his soul and Cressida admits no orifice, an opening, for a point as subtle, and in this sense, subtle meaning thin. The spacious breadth of this division admits no opening for a point as thin as Ariadne's broken woof to enter. He has a weaving metaphor. The woof is the weft in a loom. It's a thread. A thread cannot enter it. And it is, Shakespeare does say Ariadne, not Arachne. This has always puzzled me. King Lear, oh, how this mother swells up toward my heart. Hysterica passio, down, thou climbing sorrow, thy elements below. The mother literally is the uterus. And the OED describes mother as a medical condition thought to arise from a disorder of the uterus, especially its upward displacement, as he's talking about here, against other organs. By 1615, this condition was called hysteria, which is what he's talking about here. I've always been puzzled by this because no one can really explain it. The OED claims that mother is a condition that can also happen in men, but there are no examples of it happening in men outside of Shakespeare's reference right here. Women, this is why we're exhorted to get married and have a baby, because once you have a baby, your uterus will calm down and it will stay in one place, so you won't be hysterical anymore. Cymbeline, when he finds his 3 lost children, oh, what am I, a mother to the birth of 3? Ne'er mother rejoiced deliverance more. King Cymbeline doesn't compare himself to a father, he compares himself to a mother. When Richard comes back from Ireland and lands on the coast of England, he talks to the earth. And he says, as a long-parted mother with her child plays fondly with her tears and smiles in meeting, so in this way, weeping, smiling, greet I thee, my earth. Richard is the mother in this image. The Earl of Suffolk, when he has to leave Margaret. Earl of Suffolk's married to somebody else. Margaret's married to Henry VI. Suffolk says, if I depart from thee, I cannot live. And in thy sight to die, if in thy sight to die, what were it else but like a pleasant slumber in thy lap? Which is kind of ironic because she's going to enter the scene next time with his head in her lap. But like a pleasant slumber in thy lap, here could I breathe my soul into the air, as mild and gentle as the cradle babe dying with mother's dug between its lips. So I'm collecting those. If anybody runs across them, please send them to me. The masculine imagery in the mouths of women is a little different. Oh God, that I were a man, I would eat his heart in the marketplace. Ha! Beatrice, Lady Macbeth, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. I find this to be very sad because she has to unsex herself. She has to take away her femininity. She has to become more like a man to be top full of direst cruelty. That's a very sad statement of men. Imogen and Cymbeline, in yet good faith, I wished myself a man, or that we women had men's privilege of speaking first. This is also a clue, one of the clues from the art itself about women publishing, men's privilege of speaking first. Hamlet says, I wish I could unpack my heart like a whore with words. Women outspoken in public is not a good thing. In Henry IV, Part 1, Lady Percy has the biggest collection of technical terms about military warfare coming from, and they come from a woman. And thou hast talked of sallies and retires, trenches, tents, of palisados, frontiers, parapets, of basilisks, which is a kind of cannon, culverins, another kind of cannon, of prisoners ransomed, and of soldiers slain, and all the current of a heady fight. I love it that all of this comes from a woman's mouth. So I'm also looking for, I have a few more of those, but if you run across those, please let me know. Women are literate. Now, I could spend several hours talking about literacy of the time. It was much greater than we think it was. In the plays, there are only 4 clearly illiterate characters, and they're all male. There are 2 servants with a couple lines each in Timon of Athens and Romeo and Juliet, Jack Cade and Henry VI, Part 2, is it? And he's made to be a horribly ignorant buffoon by being illiterate. And, Dogberry, write me down an ass. So we expect elite women to be to be literate. And, you know, all the plays, the literate women send letters back and forth, they read books, etc. So I think a more important tell is what Shakespeare expects of the lower class women, like the nurse in Romeo and Juliet. She does some naughty discussion about characters in the alphabet. The townswomen, Mrs. Ford and Mrs. Page, they're townspeople. They're not elite women. Their husbands are probably fairly wealthy. And they talk about the press, the printing press. They're familiar with the printing process that he iterated these letters to them. Slender, in that same play, he loaned his book of riddles to Alice Shortcake. Alice Shortcake is not the name of a noblewoman in the next village. Phoebe the shepherdess, and As You Like It, she's a shepherdess, and she writes a letter. There was a difference between reading and writing. Reading was the first level, then you moved up to writing. A lot of women could read who couldn't necessarily write, but Phoebe writes a letter in verse, and Shakespeare makes a point of telling us through Sylvius that he saw her write it. Perdita, she was raised by shepherds in The Winter's Tale, and we see a shopping list that she wrote, and her brother, the shepherd, also reads it. Mopsa and Dorcas in that same play, they're shepherd girls. They not only read words, they can read music, and they spontaneously have a song together. Also, one of the girls, I forget which one, says that I love things in print because that means they're true. Kate and Bianca, their father brings in tutors. Now, they're not elite girls either. They're in middle, upper class. Tutors to teach them Greek, Latin, poetry, philosophy, music. Bianca has witty banter in Latin with her suitor. Joan La Pucelle complains, she was raised as a peasant, and she complains that somebody's writings are as bad as the Turks. So what I find even more interesting, besides just the number of women that read books, read letters, etc., are the metaphors, which I'm not going to go into here. The metaphors of literacy, which are amazing. Lady Macbeth tells Macbeth, "Your face, my Thane, is as a book in which men can read strange matters." And Berowne kind of seems to sum up what Shakespeare thinks. Well, I shouldn't say that, what Berowne thinks. "From women's eyes, this doctrine I derive. They sparkle still, always. The right Promethean fire. They are the books, the arts, the academes that show, contain, and nourish all the world." There's an amazing metaphor in Romeo and Juliet when Juliet's mother is trying to talk her into marrying Paris, and she like 20 lines of Paris is the book, and you, Juliet, are the binding and the gold clasps on that book. You're what complete that book, in a whole literacy metaphor. So let's take a look at mothers. The pet peeve of mine, because 30 years ago, a very good scholar wrote an article, new feminist article, "Where are the mothers in Shakespeare?" And she claims that the important plays don't have mothers. King Lear doesn't have a mother. Twelfth Night, there's no mother. And I have a couple of issues with this. One, this is a canard that has come down from that article into people on the street who tell me, "Oh, there's no mothers in Shakespeare." And the implication is that Shakespeare didn't care about mothers, didn't care about women, didn't write that many good roles because the mothers are missing. The second issue with this is that the author, the scholar, specifically defines the mothers in the important plays, and that changes throughout time. Hamlet, nobody liked Hamlet until Coleridge's lecture was published about it in 1897, and then everybody said, "Oh, Hamlet's so great." If you told the Elizabethan women that Cymbeline was not, Coriolanus or Winter's Tale were not important plays, they would have had it out with you. So King Lear doesn't have a mother in it. It has 3 amazing, strong, powerful women. Is that not enough? Are they lesser because there's no mother in that play? So anyway, that's my high horse here. I want to show you some of the mothers in Shakespeare. I'm not going to go through this pretty quickly because the point is just to see that these women are here. Queen Hermione, mother of Mamilius and Perdita. Her husband wants to have her murdered, but she is amazing. The most plaintive speech for her life as a mother in that play. Also, Paulina, Shakespeare specifically tells us she has 3 children. Her husband's the one who gets eaten by a bear. She rules the king for the next 16 years. Queen Gertrude, I'm sorry, she's no insignificant mother in that play. The Duchess of York, mother of the Duke of Almoral. The Duke of Almoral is doing something potentially traitorous, and his father wants to just give him up to the king. She gets on a horse, literally gets on a horse and rides off to the king and throws herself at his mercy for her son, while her husband is pleading with the king to treat him as a traitor. Volumnia, oh my God, now there's a mother, single-handedly saves Rome from utter destruction, knowing it is probably at the risk of her own son, but she sees the bigger picture. She's going to save Rome, even if it means sacrificing her son. Virgilia is the mother of Coriolanus's son, and she's the only one in the entire play who can stand up to Volumnia. Lady Capulet, Lady Montague, the nurse, three mothers in that play. Are they lesser because they have fewer lines? Queen Margaret, oh my God, she's in 4 plays. Shakespeare puts this woman in 4 plays. She went to war on behalf of her son. Count of Orsillon, mother of Bertram, and eventually mother-in-law of Helena. All's well that ends well. Strong, bossy woman. Widow Capulet of Florence. She's the mother of Diana, who Bertram bed trick with that scoundrel Bertram. Tamara, Queen of the Goths. She sets the whole play in motion when she sees her oldest son, Alarbus, chopped into pieces and thrown on a funeral fire. And this play becomes about 2 parents, both who've seen their children brutally brutalized. What a mother she is. She's not very nice, but she's a mother. Lady Macduff, can anybody forget Lady Macduff and her little baby? She has one scene, but powerful. Queen Eleanor, play open, she's 78 years old. She tells the bastard, he says, I will follow you to the grave. And she says, I hope you get there before I do. Mother of King John, she goes to war again for her son, in opposition to Constance, her daughter-in-law, who goes to war for his son, her son. And Lady Falconbridge is the mother of that bastard seduced by Richard the Lionheart. But her son becomes sort of the moral compass of that whole play. Mrs. Page, she's got 2 little kids. Funny, smart, forgives her daughter. Queen Thaisa, mother of Marina in Pericles. She gives birth on a ship, and then they put her in a casket and throw her overboard, but she doesn't die. She survives creatively. Dionysia is also a mother in Pericles. She has her own daughter, and she attempts to murder Marina for her daughter's sake. Emilia, she gives birth to 2 babies, twins, and then says, oh, I'm going to adopt these other twins because their parents are too poor. The Queen in Cymbeline, she's not very nice either, but she is a mother who, for love of her son, even attempts murder. Queen Elizabeth Grey, she's the mother of those little boys that are killed in the tower. She's got those sons. She's got Princess Elizabeth, who she marries off to save the country, and she's got older sons in the play. Duchess of York, she's the mother of 2 kings, mother Edward IV, Richard III, George, Duke of Clarence, young Rutland, who is killed in Henry VI. The word mother itself is mentioned 459 times in the plays. Dozens of characters mention their mothers, even if the mothers don't show up in the plays. So I want people to stop saying there's no mothers in Shakespeare, okay? It's not actually true. And women are the mothers have very important parts, even if they're not the focus. Now, I had a section here about the Bowdlerized plays, but I don't have time to show it. But just a quick note about Bowdlerization. The Family Shakespeare, this came out in what, 1830, I think. Has Thomas Bowdler's name on it. It was actually his sister's work, Henrietta Bowdler. Her name has become a noun, Bowdlerization. It means to take the naughty bits out. because she grew up in a family, like the Victorians had a wonderful tradition. This is pre-Victorian, actually, wonderful tradition of family reading circles. And Shakespeare was often read, but she felt there was a need to have an edition of Shakespeare that didn't have the naughty bits. So she, took those out. Nothing is added to the original, but those words and expressions are omitted, which cannot with propriety be read in a family. She doesn't have her name on the cover, one, because she's a woman. Two, probably also because she chopped her mother up with a butcher knife while she was in a wheelchair. And her brother took care of her the rest of her life. But most importantly, because as a woman, she should not have known what the naughty bits were in the first place. Shakespeare also, there were at least 40 editions of Bowdlerized plays in the 1800s. In fact, the original Riverside was very Bowdlerized. Shakespeare also Bowdlerized the source materials. And I'm not going to go into this, except here's an example. In Merchant of Venice, Portia has that thing where they have to choose from one of 3 caskets and then they get to marry her. And the source for that part of the play, the young man borrows money from the older man, takes a boat to see the Portia character, but the deal is the guys have to sleep with the Portia character 3 nights in a row. If they manage to have sex with her, they get to marry her. Shakespeare takes that out and turns it into the 3 caskets scene. The editor, David Bevington, says Shakespeare has a softening touch to the original source materials. War. This I find one of the most fascinating things. It's well known that Shakespeare is very anti-war. I have had people come up to me after I give a talk about Mary and say, how could a woman write a battle scene? William Shakespeare never went to battle either. And here's a battle scene in the text if you read it. That's it. And then you see on stage 20 minutes of fighting and slashing and blood and gore. But this is what Shakespeare wrote. They fight. Then we're going to get back to the real thing that's important, the relationships between these people. Well, also Carolyn Spurgeon, who did the collection of images, she specifically points out that Francis Bacon fully believes war is just a natural state of government. Of course, we go to war. That's what we do. Shakespeare has a very different take on it. I started collecting these kinds of things. This day hath made much work for tears in many an English mother. I have found more than 70 references where Shakespeare is concerned about the mothers, the daughters, the babies, and the elders, of how women are collateral in war. I'm going to show you just 20 of these. In Timon of Athens, and take our goodly aged men by the beards, giving our holy virgins to the stain of contumelious, beastly, mad-brained war. Henry V is very concerned about this. And the fleshed soldier, a fleshed soldier is one who has murdered somebody in battle for the first time. He's had his first flesh. So this fleshed soldier, rough and hard of heart at that moment, because he's in it, and the liberty of bloody hand shall range with conscience wide as hell, mowing like grass your fresh, fair virgins and your flowering infants. Later, he says, what is it to me when you yourselves are cause if your pure maidens fall into the hand of hot and forcing violation? He says it a third time. If not, why in a moment look to see the blind and bloody soldier? It's a hendiadys, a rhetorical device. He's blind from being bloody all over his face. The blind and bloody soldier with foul hand defile the locks of your shrill, shrieking daughters. Your fathers taken by the silver beards and their most reverend heads dashed to the walls. Your naked infants spitted upon pikes, whilst the mad mothers with their howls confused, disorderly, to break the clouds. How much does it take to break the clouds? This concern of what happens to women, children, and old people is throughout the plays. Henry says this in response to all those tennis balls, a ton, T-U-N, giant barrel of tennis balls. For many 1,000 widows, the women, shall this his mock out of their dear husbands, mock mothers from their sons, and some are yet ungotten and unborn that shall have cause to curse the dolphin's scorn. Julius Caesar. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar, that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. Kind of like in Titus Andronicus, when they tell him one more thing and he starts to laugh, and they say, how can you laugh at this? And he says, I have no more tears to shed. But again, it's the mothers and the infants. Who by the hand, this is in King John, who by the hand of France this day hath made much work for tears in many an English mother, whose sons lie scattered on the bleeding ground. Many a widow's husband groveling lies, coldly embracing the discolored. Henry VI, Part 2, York, Duke of York, not our old men spares, no more will I spare their babes. Tears virginal, tears from those virgins, shall be to me even as the dew to fire, not very effective. And beauty, remember beauty meaning young women, that the tyrant oft reclaims or allows to go free. Beauty shall to my flaming wrath be oil and flax. Flax oil is different in that it doesn't even need a spark. It can burst into flame at like 120 degrees. Duke of Bedford and Henry VI, Part 1, posterity, a wait for wretched years. These years are so wretched that the women don't even have milk left anymore. When at their mother's moist eyes, babes shall suck. The babies have to suck nourishment from their mother's tears. When at their mother's moist eyes, babes shall suck. Our isle be made to nourish a salt tears, and none but women left to wail the dead. Joan Le Pucelle in Henry VI says, and see the cities and the towns defaced by wasting ruin of the cruel foe, as looks the mother on her lowly babe, when death doth close his tender dying eyes. Jack Cade, the peasant who puts up a big revolt. There shall not a maid be married, but she shall pay to me her maidenhead before their husbands have it. He also says, let them break your backs with burdens, take your houses over your heads, ravish your wives and daughters before your faces. Comenius, you have hope, you have helped to ravish your own daughters by letting this war happen, and to melt the city leads upon your pates, to see your wives dishonored to your noses. I was just astounded when I started collecting these. As I said, 70. You won't find 70 of those in the entire collection of every writer's work throughout the entire period. This intense worry about what happens in war to women, mothers, widows. Now, of course, a man could have been just as concerned. I mean, my sweetheart John, bursts into tears when he sees a mouse in a trap. Of course, men could be concerned about this. The odd thing is, one, what all these things are talking about are what men do to women. And two, why do none of the other writers, 3,000 plays, I haven't read all 3,000 of them, but this is not a concern of any other writer at the time. I've looked through several of the plays, the Tamburlaines, the Battle of Alcazar, a couple other ones, almost no references to women at all, whereas this writer seems to be very, very concerned. Okay, this is just a 5-minute little thing that kind of sums up what I saw in my study, in my doctorate, of the history of reading Shakespeare. I actually had to make an apology in the beginning of my dissertation saying, I didn't start out to talk about why women read Shakespeare, but in the history of reading Shakespeare, it's women who show up in the historical record. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. I did find a couple of men's reading groups who mostly were drinking groups. This is just some quotations from history. Margaret Cavendish, one of the 1664, she was a poet, a writer, a playwright. She said about Shakespeare, nay, one would think that he had been metamorphosed from a man to a woman. For who could describe Cleopatra better than he hath done, and many other females of his own creating, too many to relate. 1664. Aphra Behn, known as the first woman who actually made a living from her writing, in a preface to one of her books, claimed Shakespeare as an ally, as an honorary woman writer. What I find fascinating about this in particular is I once read an article that I can't find anymore about a theory that Aphra Behn is Mary Sidney's granddaughter. And I thought, oh, maybe she has stories coming down through her family that claim Shakespeare as an honorary woman writer. Lewis Tybald, 1726. And there is scarce a poet that our English tongue boasts of who is more the subject of the ladies' reading. In fact, it was the Ladies' Shakespeare Club that was tired of the few plays that were shown on stage and requested more of the plays that they were reading to be performed. This Ladies' Shakespeare's Club, 1737. Some ladies indeed have shown a truly public spirit in rescuing the admirable, this was in a newspaper article, the admirable yet almost forgotten Shakespeare from being totally sunk in oblivion. Shakespeare's rescued not by actors, not by men, but by reading ladies. Somebody else wrote in a magazine article, the ladies of Great Britain formed themselves into a society and revived the memory of the forsaken Shakespeare. David Garrick, well, first of all, it was the Ladies' Shakespeare Club that did the fundraising and got everything in the works to put a monument statue of Shakespeare in Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner. It was not men who did that, but that's hard to find. It was real. I was shocked to discover that it was the Ladies' Shakespeare Club, that it was women who did that, because nobody mentions that. But 25 years after it was restored, David Garrick is still thanking them. It was you ladies that restored Shakespeare to the stage. You formed yourselves into a society to protect his fame and erected a monument to his and your own honor. And your own honor. That's been a thing of the women. They kind of gathered that upon themselves too in Westminster Abbey. Mary Cowden Clark, one of the first editors of Shakespeare, she is exhorting young women to read the plays. This is what she tells women: to read Shakespeare's works, even superficially, is entertainment. To linger over them lovingly and admiringly is enjoyment. To study them profoundly is wisdom moral and intellectual. Jenny June Crowley was a journalist, and when, I think it was Mark Twain, is that about the right time, came to town, she was not allowed into the luncheon with him because she was a woman. So she started the Women's Club movement, which is still going on today. Santa Fe has a Women's Club building. 75% of the libraries in America were built by these women's clubs. And the women's club studied all kinds of things. That's a fabulous, I could go on for hours about them, but a lot of the reading groups, a lot of the study groups that they had were of Shakespeare. And Jenny June Crowley says about this, the Shakespeare study, the study is rarely given up, and new clubs are constantly formed to undertake it. The study of Shakespeare stimulates the mind, broadens and uplifts it, and gives an interest in all vital questions. And this is what she's telling to women. Helena Fawcett, the actress, said, woman's words coming from a man's lips, a man's heart, it is monstrous to think of. One quite pities Shakespeare, who had to put up with seeing his brightest creations thus marred, misrepresented, spoiled. And Thomas Higginson in 1911 wrote, let the most accomplished critic of Shakespeare be announced to give a lecture on his favorite theme in a hall or a parlor by day or by evening. And it can be safely guaranteed that 3/4 and probably 9/10 of his audience will be women. Now, his very comment here is why Shakespeare, the study of Shakespeare, was not allowed in universities until the early 1900s. And even then, it was allowed in as a difficult subject to scientifically discover what order the plays were written in. It wasn't allowed in university because if women could do Shakespeare, it didn't have the necessary intellectual rigor to be allowed in a university. What I find interesting about this, one, the same thing is true today. Reading groups, I've had reading groups for 2 decades now. If they're not entirely women, they're mostly women. Classrooms studying Shakespeare, mostly women. In audiences, Mark Rylance told me that the Globe told him that something like 60% of tickets are bought by women. And then, of course, the other 40% are probably bringing women. So I just find this really intriguing that women have had this really strong connection to this body of work, as opposed to the body of work of any of the other playwrights of the time. And is there some like quantum level connection between these writings that speak to women so profoundly and the author? I don't know, still could be a man. Shakespeare, again from Juliet Dusenberg, saw men and women as equal in a world which declared them unequal. So in Shakespeare's world, as we know, women were not equal, but this particular writer sees them as equal. So for me, if I'm going to be convinced by some male authorship candidate, you would have to show me his life reflects what these plays reflect.
Yes, clap, clap, clap. If anyone has a question or a comment, please put it in the chat and start it with the word question so that I can find them easily.